The laughter started before the wagon even stopped. It rolled across the muddy main street like a cold wind, gathering strength from every porch, every hitching rail, every man leaning against a storefront pretending not to stare. Willamina Hartwell kept her hands folded in her lap and looked straight ahead. She had spent the last 6 days crossing rough country to reach a mountain settlement so small it barely deserved a name on a map. She had endured rain, broken roads, and the constant fear that someone would discover the truth before she arrived. Now she knew the truth had arrived before she had. A boy stood beside the freight office holding a photograph. Her photograph. Or rather, the photograph she had sent. The picture showed a slender young woman, vague épité hat, bright eyes and soft features. A beautiful woman. A dead woman. Her younger sister, Eleanor. The boy waved the photograph above his head. More laughter erupted. Willamina felt her face burn. The driver climbed down from the wagon and avoided looking at her. Across the street, several men exchanged grins. One woman openly shook her head. "Poor fool who ordered her," she muttered. Willamina heard every word. She was taller than most women. Broader, too. Years of laundry work, hauling water, lifting crates, and surviving on her own had built muscle where society preferred softness. Her plain brown dress strained against shoulders hardened by labor. No one ever called her beautiful. No one ever had. The photograph had been her last desperate gamble. And now everyone knew. The crowd suddenly fell quiet. A horse approached from the northern trail. The rider sat straight in the saddle despite the falling snow. He was a large man. Not fat. Solid. Built like part of the mountain itself. A heavy rifle rested across his saddle. His dark coat carried traces of frost. His face showed little expression. The rider dismounted without hurry. Thaddius Corbett. The man who had written for a wife. The man who had paid the travel costs. The man she had deceived. Nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. The mountain man accepted the photograph from the boy. He studied it. Then he looked at Willamina. A long silence followed. She expected anger. She expected humiliation. Perhaps he would demand repayment she could never provide. Perhaps he would leave her standing in the street with nowhere to go. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Moat sent the wrong picture," she said quietly. Several people snorted. A lie too weak to survive. Thaddius continued staring. Finally he asked one question. The single word hit harder than any accusation. Willamina swallowed. Because boarding houses charged more than she could earn. Because her stepfather had gambled away everything her mother left behind. Because employers hired pretty women first. Because hunger made desperate people dangerous. Because winter was coming. Because she wanted to live. Instead she answered honestly. The crowd became silent again. For a moment something shifted behind the mountain man's eyes. Not pity. Recognition. As if he understood something he never intended to explain. He folded the photograph. Carefully. Then slipped it into his coat pocket. A merchant stepped forward. "You can be serious." "Corbett. The womaness a fraud." Several others nodded. The mountain man looked at them. Only looked. Nobody spoke again. Then he turned back toward Willamina. She blinked. A faint hint of approval touched his expression. The crowd waited. Willamina waited. Thaddius picked up her trunk. The entire street seemed stunned. One man actually laughed in disbelief. The mountain man paused. His answer was simple. He glanced once toward Willamina. Then he walked away. The crowd parted. No one argued. No one stopped him. And nobody understood why. Least of all Willamina. The climb toward his cabin took the rest of the day. The settlement disappeared behind them. Pine forests closed around the trail. Snow drifted through the branches. The higher they climbed, the colder the world became. Thaddius spoke little. Willamina didn't complain. That seemed to earn another measure of silent approval. By dusk they reached a ridge overlooking endless wilderness. The cabin stood alone against the mountainside. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A small barn leaned beside a fenced enclosure. Stacks of firewood sat beneath covered shelters. Everything appeared sturdy, practical, built to last. The place felt less like a home and more like a fortress against winter. Thaddius opened the door. Warm air spilled outside. Willamina stepped into the cabin. The room surprised her. Books. Dozens of them. Shelves lined one wall. Maps covered another. A large work table stood near the fireplace. Everything was neat, orderly, unexpected. She glanced at the mountain man. His eyebrow lifted slightly. For the first time, she almost smiled. Almost. Thaddius pointed toward a small room. No questions. No conditions. No threats. Just a room. Willamina set down her bag. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Safety. She had nearly forgotten Verkepete it felt like. Yet something remained wrong. Very wrong. While unpacking, she noticed a folded document partly hidden beneath several books on a nearby table. She was trying to pry. The paper simply caught her attention. An official seal appeared in one corner. Government issue. Land office. Property notice. The document had been opened recently. A line of text near the top immediately stood out. She froze. Years spent keeping accounts for merchants had taught her to recognize trouble when it appeared on paper. And trouble often began with official notices. The cabin door opened behind her. Thaddius entered carrying firewood. He noticed where she was looking. For the first time since they met, genuine tension appeared in his face. Not anger. Concern. The mountain man crossed the room and quietly folded the document closed. Willamina looked at him. A long silence followed. The fire cracked softly. Wind rattled the shutters. Finally he answered. Outside, darkness swallowed the ridge. Inside, the flames danced across the folded government notice. And neither of them knew that before winter ended, that single piece of paper would draw them into a fight involving stolen claims, hidden records, violent trappers, and a secret buried deep in the mountains. A secret someone was already willing to kill for. The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow strikes against the cabin door. Thaddius was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Willamina sat upright in bed. Then came a voice from outside. A man's voice. Cold. Confident. And somehow already aware that she had arrived. Corbett, the stranger, called through the darkness. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Then the stranger added one final sentence. Willamina did not sleep again that night. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed listening to the mountain wind scrape against the cabin walls. The stranger's voice lingered in her mind. Not what he had said. How he had said it. As though he already knew something. As though he wanted Thaddius to question the woman under his roof. The cabin remained silent for nearly an hour after the visitor rode away. Then she heard footsteps crossing the floor. A door opened. Closed. The mountain man had returned to bed, or at least to his room. She wondered whether he regretted bringing her here. The thought followed her into a restless sleep. Morning arrived grey and cold. Willamina woke before sunrise. Habit. Years of labour had trained her body to rise before daylight. She dressed quietly and stepped into the main room. Thaddius was already awake. A kettle hung over the fire. Coffee simmered. The mountain man sat at the table studying a map. He glanced up once. No accusation. No mention of the stranger. No discussion of the photograph. The silence felt almost unnatural. She approached the stove. His answer came immediately. That surprised her. Most men she had known preferred either complete control or complete laziness. Thaddius simply pointed toward a sack of flour. Within minutes she had dough mixed. The mountain man watched briefly. Not critically. Observantly. As if measuring competence instead of appearance. She found she preferred that. Outside, snow drifted steadily. The mountain seemed endless beyond the windows. Isolated. Beautiful. Dangerous. The cabin truly sat alone. The realization struck her more deeply in daylight. If something happened here, help would not arrive. Not quickly. Maybe not at all. After breakfast, Thaddius stood. Willamina grabbed her coat. He raised an eyebrow. The answer appeared to satisfy him. A few minutes later they followed a narrow path down toward a partially frozen creek. The snow reached nearly to her knees in places. The climb back would be difficult. Yet she refused to complain. By mid-morning they had hauled enough water to fill barrels inside the cabin. Then came firewood. Then fence repairs. Then clearing snow from the barn roof. Work. Constant work. Mountain work. The kind of labour that left no room for self-pity. By noon her arms ached. By evening every muscle burned. And strangely, she felt alive. More alive than she had in years. After supper, Thaddius finally spoke about the stranger. Willamina looked up. The mountain man stared into the fire. The answer settled heavily between them. "Who is he?" she asked. Something about the way he said the name suggested history. Not friendship. The opposite. Thaddius almost smiled. That wasn't he an answer. Willamina noticed. He noticed her noticing. Neither spoke further. The fire crackled. Outside the storm deepened. Later that evening, while Thaddius worked in the barn, Willamina cleaned the cabin. Not because she had been asked. Because she preferred order. Dust collected behind bookshelves. Supplies needed organizing. Several storage boxes sat beneath the work table. When she lifted one, something rattled. Papers. Dozens of papers. Ledgers. Receipts. Supply records. Her fingers paused. Numbers. Columns. Accounts. A familiar language. For years she had worked for merchants balancing books others found confusing. Numbers made sense. People often didn't. She began sorting. One ledger became 2. Then 3. The record stretched back several years. Fur sales. Trapping permits. Equipment purchases. Trading accounts. The system itself was unusual. The inconsistencies were. Willamina frowned. She turned back several pages. Checked dates. checked totals, then checked them again. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. A transaction appeared twice. Same date. Same quantity. Same payment amount. Impossible. She continued reading. A second duplication appeared. Then a third. The amounts weren't enormous. Not individually, but together. A significant sum. The front door opened. Cold air swept inside. Thaddius entered carrying a crate. He stopped when he saw the ledgers spread across the table. For a moment she feared he might be angry. Instead, he looked curious. She pointed at a page. His expression didn't change. He approached. She showed him. Then another. Then another. The mountain man studied the records carefully. Silence stretched. Finally he asked a question. Willamina met his gaze. Something shifted in the room. A tiny adjustment. Trust. Not complete trust. Not yet. But enough to matter. Thaddius sat down. Together they reviewed the books. For the next 2 hours they compared entries. Dates. Amounts. Receipts. Inventory lists. The deeper they looked, the stranger things became. Missing pages. Altered figures. Payments that didn't match deliveries. By midnight a troubling picture had emerged. Someone had been skimming money from transactions involving mountain trappers for years. Carefully. Gradually. Enough to avoid attention. Until now, Willamina leaned back. The answer came immediately. The room fell silent. Neither needed to say what they were thinking. The same man who had appeared at midnight. The same man watching the mountain. The same man apparently connected to the land dispute. The same man whose records now look suspicious. Thaddius closed the ledger. His jaw tightened. Willamina looked toward the snow-covered darkness outside. For the first time, the mountain man smiled. A small smile. A grim one. The next morning they rode into town. Not because they wanted to, because supplies were running low. The settlement looked different now. Less welcoming. More watchful. Word of her arrival had clearly spread. People stared. Some whispered. Others openly laughed. Willamina ignored them. Years of ridicule had taught her that dignity often meant refusing to participate. Inside the trading office she immediately recognized Everett Kane. Tall. Well-dressed. Confident. The kind of man who smiled while calculating profit. His eyes landed on her first. Then on Thaddius. Then briefly on the supply list in Thaddius' hand. The smile widened. Mrs. Corbett. The title startled her. Not because it was accurate. Because it wasn't tea. Not yet. Everett seemed amused by her reaction. His eyes sharpened. He had expected discomfort. Perhaps embarrassment. Instead she remained calm. The merchant shifted attention toward Thaddius. The room quieted. Several customers suddenly became interested in nearby shelves. Listening. Waiting. Thaddius' answer was short. Everett sighed theatrically. No one spoke. Not a single person. Everett opened a drawer, pulled out a document, and slid it across the counter. Willamina immediately recognized the official seal. Land Office. Government issue. The same kind of notice she had seen in the cabin. only this one contained something new. A map. And a signature. She froze. Because the signature belonged to a man who had supposedly died 8 years earlier. Everett watched her carefully, as though waiting to see whether she noticed. She had, and suddenly she understood something. The land dispute was about taxes, or boundaries, or paperwork mistakes. Someone had built the entire claim on a dead man's signature. The moment she realized it, Everett Kane smiled, as though he knew exactly what she had just discovered, and exactly how dangerous that discovery might become. Everett Kane's smile remained fixed long after Thaddius folded the document and slid it back across the counter. The merchant looked pleased, not confident. Pleased, as though the entire exchange had unfolded exactly the way he wanted. Willamina noticed the difference. Confident men expected victory. Pleased men expected a trap to spring. That realization stayed Vekapite at her all the way back to the mountain. Snow drifted across the trail. The horses moved carefully along narrow ridges where a single mistake could send rider and animal tumbling into rocky ravines below. Neither she nor Thaddius spoke for nearly an hour. Finally she broke the silence. He glanced toward her. It wasn't a question. She shook her head. That got his attention. Thaddius frowned. If someone copied it, they copied it perfectly. The mountain man remained silent. Willamina continued. A forged signature usually changes pressure patterns, stroke angles, letter spacing. This one didn't. Moat used to copy inventory ledgers for merchants. Hundreds of pages. Every month. She looked down the trail. If that's a forgery, it's the best one I've ever seen. The answer didn't seem to comfort him. It shouldn't, because another possibility existed. A worse one. Someone may have obtained an authentic signature after the man's supposed death. Neither explanation felt good. The mountain swallowed the rest of the conversation. By sunset they reached the cabin. The sky glowed orange behind distant peaks. Smoke rose from the chimney. The familiar sight felt warmer than it had only days ago. That realization surprised Willamina. She had spent less than a week here, yet returning already felt different from arriving, as though the cabin had begun shifting from shelter into something else, something closer to home. She pushed the thought away. It was too soon for such things. Far too soon. The next morning brought work. Mountain life always did. A section of fence had collapsed beneath accumulated snow. The goat enclosure needed reinforcing. One corner of the barn roof leaked during storms. Firewood supplies needed expanding before deeper winter arrived. Thaddius handed her an axe after breakfast. Most men would have assumed she couldn't use it. He didn't. Willamina accepted the handle. He nodded once. That was all. No surprise. No skepticism. No lecture. Simply trust. The strange thing was how much that mattered. They spent the day cutting fallen pine. The work was exhausting. Cold air burned her lungs. Sweat soaked her clothes despite the temperature. By afternoon her hands ached. Yet she refused to slow down. Several times she noticed Thaddius watching. Not critically. Not competitively. Measuring. Learning. The same way she was learning him. At midday they stopped beside a stream for lunch. The mountain man handed her a tin cup of coffee. She accepted it gratefully. For a while neither spoke. The silence was uncomfortable. That surprised her too. Eventually she asked a question. Thaddius stared across the snow-covered valley. The answer took a long time. Finally he spoke. She waited. Nothing more came. The answer sounded incomplete. Not dishonest. Incomplete. Willamina took another sip. Again. Direct. Practical. Yet something in his expression suggested there was more beneath the surface. Pain, perhaps. Loss. The kind people carried for years. She decided not to push. Some wounds revealed themselves only when ready. That evening they returned to the cabin carrying enough wood for several weeks. Willamina immediately noticed something unusual. The bookshelves. Specifically one shelf. Several volumes sat stacked on the floor. She frowned. Earlier that morning they had been arranged neatly. Now a rough measuring string stretched along the wall. Fresh pencil marks appeared beside it. Thaddius glanced up from a pile of lumber. She blinked. The existing shelves already seemed large. The mountain man continued working. Willamina stared. Had he noticed that? Apparently he had. He asked. She hesitated, then admitted the truth. For the first time she saw genuine amusement in his eyes. The realization struck her unexpectedly. He was building storage. He was building space for her. Not because she asked. Because he noticed. The warmth that spread through her chest felt dangerous. She turned away before he could see it. The following week settled into a rhythm. Work. Meals. Repairs. Snow. Slow conversations beside the stove. The mountain no longer felt quite so hostile. Willamina learned where the best water flowed beneath the ice. She learned how to recognize approaching storms. She learned which trails remained safe after snowfall. Most importantly, she learned how lonely the mountain man truly was. The realization came gradually. One observation at a time. Only one extra chair stood beside the table. Only one cup showed signs of long-term. Dust-covered sections of the bookshelf nobody had touched in years. The cabin felt lived in. But not shared. Not for a very long time. One afternoon she discovered exactly how long. She had been organizing supplies inside a storage chest when she found a faded photograph. The picture showed 3 people. A younger Thaddius. A woman. And a small boy. The sight hit her unexpectedly. She stared at the image. The door opened. Thaddius stepped inside carrying feed sack. His gaze landed on the photograph. Everything stopped. The room changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. The silence hardened. Willamina carefully lowered the picture. The mountain man looked away. For several seconds she thought he might leave. Instead he sat heavily in a chair. The words sounded old. Used. Repeated many times. Yet no easier. Willamina waited. Eventually he continued. She closed her eyes. No gunfight. No accident. No dramatic story. Just sickness. The frontier's oldest thief. A disease nobody could shoot. Nobody could outrun. Nobody could bargain with. Mortmet sorry, she said again. This time he nodded. The silence returned. But now it felt different. Not hostile. Shared. Later that night a blizzard arrived. The worst storm since her arrival. Wind hammered the cabin. Snow buried the windows. The mountain vanished beneath darkness. Around midnight a violent crash echoed from outside. Both were awake instantly. Thaddius grabbed a lantern. He was already moving toward the door. Willamina ignored the instruction and followed. The storm nearly ripped the door from their hands. Snow blasted into their faces. Visibility barely reached 10 feet. Then the lantern light found the source. The barn, or rather part of it. A large section of roof had collapsed. "Help me," Thaddius shouted. They fought through the storm, beam by beam, rope by rope, for nearly an hour. Finally they managed to rescue the trapped animals before the remainder of the structure failed. By the time they stumbled back into the cabin, both were soaked and freezing. Willamina's hands shook violently. Thaddius immediately shoved more wood into the stove. The fire roared. Neither spoke. The storm screamed outside. Then she noticed something. The mountain man was bleeding. A long cut stretched across his forearm, probably from falling timber. The firmness surprised both of them. For a second he actually looked startled. Then he obeyed. Willamina cleaned the wound. Carefully. Efficiently. The way her mother had taught her years ago. Herbal wash. Clean cloth. Proper wrapping. No wasted motion. When she finished, Thaddius examined the bandage. The mountain man studied her quietly, then said something she hadn't expected. Before she could answer, a sudden sound interrupted them. A horse. Outside. In the middle of a blizzard. Both froze. Nobody should have been travelling tonight. Nobody. The sound came again. Closer. Then a knock rattled the cabin door. Not frantic. Not desperate. Deliberate. 3 slow knocks. Exactly like before. Thaddius reached for his rifle. Willamina's stomach tightened. The mountain man opened the door. A figure stood beyond the storm. Snow covered his coat. Ice clung to his beard. The stranger looked exhausted. Terrified. And injured. His eyes found Thaddius immediately. "You were right," he said. "What happened?" Thaddius asked. The man swallowed, then spoke words that turned the cabin silent. The name matched the dead man whose signature appeared on the land claim. The stranger looked toward the fire, toward the table, toward Willamina, then delivered the revelation that made her blood run cold. "And the body is in there." The storm howled around the cabin as if the mountain itself had heard the news and objected. Nobody moved. The stranger stood dripping melted snow onto the floorboards while the fire crackled behind him. Thaddius slowly lowered his rifle. "What exactly are you saying?" "Ben?" The man removed his hat with shaking hands. Ben Holloway looked older than his 40 years tonight. Fear could do that. What means somebody opened the grave? Mort saw it myself. The room remained silent. Willamina felt her stomach tighten. The dead man. Elias Granger. The same name attached to the disputed land claim. The same supposedly deceased man whose signature had appeared on official documents. Now his grave was empty. Ben swallowed. "Why?" Thaddius asked. He wiped moisture from his beard. Nobody spoke. Ben continued. They weren't old tracks. Could have been more than a day or two. The fire popped loudly. Willamina folded her arms. Ben looked directly at her. The answer sent a chill through the room. For several moments only the storm spoke. Finally Thaddius pulled out a chair. Ben obeyed gratefully. Willamina poured coffee. The man accepted it with trembling hands. Something about him felt honest. Terrified people usually were. After a few minutes, Thaddius unfolded a map across the table. Ben pointed. The church cemetery sat several miles below the settlement, not far from the old wagon road. close enough for someone to access easily, far enough that most people would notice nighttime visitors. Willamina studied the map. Then another detail caught her attention. A creek crossed nearby. A narrow trail branched away into the mountains, the same direction as Thaddius' property. Interesting. Very interesting. Ben eventually left shortly before dawn. The storm eased enough for travel. When the door closed behind him, silence returned. Willamina stared at the map. Thaddius nodded. She looked up. The distinction mattered. The mountain man noticed her expression. She pointed toward the map. The room fell quiet. The logic was simple. Too simple. Yet it lingered. Thaddius rubbed his jaw. Willamina looked back toward the papers. That answer seemed to satisfy him. At least for now. Morning brought clear skies. The blizzard had passed. The mountain glittered beneath fresh snow. Beautiful. Deceptive. Dangerous. By noon they were outside repairing damage left by the storm. The collapsed section of barn required immediate attention. Winter would not wait. Neither would hungry livestock. For hours they worked side by side, replacing beams, clearing debris, strengthening supports. The labour felt strangely comfortable. Not easy. Comfortable. An important difference. At one point Thaddius handed her a hammer. Not because he couldn't do the work, because he trusted her to do it. The realization warmed her more than the fire ever could. Late that afternoon she discovered something unexpected. A hidden compartment. Not intentional. Accidental. One damaged section of wall inside the barn had broken open during the collapse. Behind it sat a narrow wooden box. Dust covered every inch. Nobody had touched it in years. He turned immediately. She pointed. Within moments Beote Hart knelt beside the box. The lock had long since rusted away. Opening it required little effort. Inside lay papers. Old papers. Very old. Property surveys. Land markers. Supply receipts. And one leather-bound notebook. The moment Willamina opened it, she knew it mattered. Careful handwriting filled every page. Dates. Locations. Measurements. Names. A survey journal. She flipped through several entries, then stopped. The name Elias Granger appeared repeatedly. Her pulse quickened. Thaddius leaned closer. The journal belonged to a surveyor who had worked these mountains nearly 15 years earlier. Every entry documented property boundaries, creek locations, timber stands, mining claims. The information was precise, professional, valuable. Then Willamina found something else. A folded map hidden inside the back cover. The paper crackled as she opened it. Red ink crossed sections of the mountain. Blue lines marked older property borders, and one area stood circled repeatedly. The location sat directly inside the disputed land claim. Silence filled the barn. Thaddius stared. Willamina studied the markings. The mountain man nodded slowly. That part was undeniable. The notebook came inside with them. That evening they examined every page. Hours passed. Coffee cooled. The fire burned low. Neither noticed. The journal revealed something fascinating. The disputed land boundaries had changed repeatedly over the years. Not naturally. Not because of geography. Because of paperwork. Each revision shifted ownership slightly. A creek moved here. A marker changed there. A ridge became part of another parcel. Tiny adjustments. Almost invisible. Yet over time the changes accumulated. Eventually one conclusion became impossible to ignore. Someone had gradually rewritten the mountain. Willamina sat back. Thaddius looked up. She pointed toward the pages. The answer settled heavily between them. Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. Whatever scheme existed had started long before either of them recognized it. Long before the current dispute. Long before the missing body. Someone had been preparing this for a very long time. The realization felt enormous. And frightening. Then another name appeared. Willamina froze. She reread the entry. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her heartbeat quickened. She turned the journal toward Thaddius. A single line stood highlighted beneath faded ink. Survey completed under supervision of Deputy Recorder James Hartwell. The room suddenly felt smaller. Much smaller. Thaddius looked at her. Then back at the page. Then at her again. Willamina nodded slowly. Silence. The fire crackled. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin. Inside, everything changed. For years she had believed Amos Hartwell incapable of anything beyond gambling, drinking, and ruining lives. Now his name appeared inside records connected to land fraud, connected to Elias Granger, connected to the disputed claim, connected perhaps even to the empty grave. Willamina stared at the page. A terrible possibility began forming. One she did not want to consider. One she desperately hoped was wrong. Thaddius saw it on her face. She swallowed. Slowly. Carefully. Then spoke the words she wished she didn't believe. The mountain man remained silent. Willamina looked toward the dark window. Toward the distant town below, toward secrets buried for years, and finally finished the thought. What if he's the reason Elias Granger disappeared in the first place? Willamina barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same 3 things. The dead man's signature, the empty grave, her stepfather S name. By dawn the fire had burned low, and pale winter light filtered through the cabin windows. Thaddius was already awake. She found him outside splitting wood. The sharp crack of the axe echoed across the frozen mountainside. He looked up as she approached. Neither pretended they weren't thinking about the same thing. "You still believe it?" he asked. Willamina folded her arms against the cold. The axe struck another log. Wood split cleanly. She watched steam rise from her breath. Thaddius listened. He lied. He cheated. He gambled. Another strike. The mountain man nodded. That matched what little he knew. So is involved, she continued. He was T, the architect. The blunt assessment sounded exactly like Thaddius. Willamina hated how plausible it felt. Someone smarter had likely guided him. Someone patient. Someone willing to wait years. Someone like Everett Kane. The thought settled heavily between them. By midday they rode into town. Not together. Deliberately. Thaddius preferred caution. If people believed they were investigating, information would vanish. So he headed toward the blacksmith. Willamina went to the general store. The arrangement felt simple enough. In reality it was dangerous. Because she was walking directly into the place where her stepfather had ruined most of her life. The settlement buzzed with rumors. News of the empty grave had spread overnight. People whispered on porches. Conversations stopped when strangers approached. Fear travelled quickly in small towns, especially frontier towns. Willamina entered the store. The familiar scent of flour, leather, coffee, and lamp oil greeted her. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Abigail Turner, a widow, sharp-eyed, practical, the sort of woman who noticed everything. Abigail looked up. Recognition flashed immediately. Then curiosity. Then sympathy. Not pity. Sympathy. A much rarer thing. Willamina smiled faintly. Abigail studied her for a moment, then lowered her voice. Willamina followed her gaze towards several customers pretending not to listen. Smile touched Abigail's lips. That answer seemed to earn respect. Good. Willamina needed allies. Over the next half hour she purchased supplies while steering the conversation carefully. Not pushing. Not prying. Simply listening. People often revealed more than they intended when allowed to talk freely. Eventually the topic drifted toward land records, then toward old surveyors, then toward Deputy Recorder James Hartwell. Her stepfather. Abigail's expression darkened immediately. Willamina kept her voice neutral. The widow snorted. Interesting. Very interesting. She purchased another sack of flour she didn't particularly need. Sometimes information required patience. Finally Abigail leaned closer. Willamina's stomach tightened. The widow began arranging canned goods. A casual movement. A careful disguise. Paid debts. Bought whiskey. Gambled bigger than usual. Abigail laughed. The widow shrugged. That answer came instantly. Willamina felt something cold settle inside her chest. Her stepfather had been poor his entire life. Sudden money meant opportunity. Or crime. Usually both. She thanked Abigail and left. Outside, snow drifted across the street. Her boots crunched through ice. She was halfway toward the livery stable when a voice stopped her cold. She froze. No. No. Not here. Not now. Slowly she turned. A familiar figure stood beside the saloon. Thin. Unshaven. Poorly dressed. Yet carrying himself with the same selfish confidence she remembered. Amos Hartwell. Her stepfather. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The years vanished. She was 16 again, watching him gamble away rent money, watching creditors pound on doors, watching her mother cry when she thought nobody was looking. Amos smiled. The expression made her skin crawl. Willamina said nothing. He approached. Not too close. Just close enough. She finally found her voice. The smile widened. Money. Of course. It was always money. Amos removed his gloves. His eyes swept across her coat. The supplies. The horse. Calculating. Always calculating. Willamina felt anger rising. Not fear. Not any more. Anger. The smile disappeared. Good. For the first time she saw irritation. She nearly laughed. Fairness. From Amos Hartwell, the man who had stolen from family, borrowed from widows, cheated workers, abandoned promises. The word sounded absurd. There it was. At last. The true reason. Amos leaned closer. The statement stunned her, then infuriated her. The answer emerged instantly. For a second, genuine anger flashed across his face. The mask slipped, then returned. Amos lowered his voice. A warning, not advice. Willamina's eyes narrowed. His smile returned. The worst kind. The kind that never reached the eyes. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unpleasant. Dangerous. Then he added something that made her blood run cold. Willamina stared. Not husband. Not yet. But she ignored the correction, because the rest mattered far more. Amos chuckled. Her pulse quickened. Too much certainty. Too much confidence. The old fool knew something. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted. A deep voice. Calm. Dangerously calm. Amos turned. So did Willamina. Thaddius stood 20 feet away. Snow dusted his coat. His expression revealed nothing. That somehow made him more intimidating. Amos laughed. Nobody joined him. The mountain man walked forward slowly. Not aggressively. Not hurriedly. Simply moving with the confidence of someone who feared very little. Amos suddenly looked smaller. Everyone noticed, including Amos. Thaddius stopped beside Willamina. The silence stretched. Several townspeople openly watched now. The street had become an audience. Again, just like the day she arrived. But this time felt different. Very different. Amos examined the mountain man, perhaps searching for weakness, perhaps hoping for fear. He found neither. Finally he stepped back. One step. Then another. The smile returned. Thaddius answered immediately. The single word landed like a hammer. Amos hesitated, then walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed. The moment passed. But not entirely, because Willamina had noticed something. Something small. Something important. During the confrontation, a folded paper had slipped partially from Amos Hartwell's coat pocket. Most people would have missed it. She didn't. Years spent handling records had trained her eyes. She had seen enough to recognize an official seal. A county seal. And beneath it, a property transfer number. The exact type used in land. She turned toward Thaddius. The mountain man nodded. Her voice tightened. He studied her face, then realized she was talking about ordinary paperwork. Willamina swallowed. The answer felt impossible, yet she knew what she'd seen. The mountain man remained silent. She continued. Snow drifted between them. The town faded away. Everything narrowed to a single terrifying possibility. Willamina met his gaze. The transfer date was 3 months after Elias Granger supposedly died. The ride back to the mountain passed in near silence. Not because there was nothing to say. Because there was too much. Snow creaked beneath the horses' hooves. The winter sun hung low above the distant ridges, and between them travelled a single impossible fact. A property transfer dated 3 months after a man's death. If Elias Granger had truly died when the records claimed, the document should not exist. If the document existed, either the date was false, or the death was. Neither possibility felt safe. By the time they reached the cabin, darkness had begun gathering among the pines. Thaddius unsaddled the horses without speaking. Willamina carried supplies inside. The familiar warmth of the cabin greeted them. Usually it felt comforting. Tonight it felt like the centre of a storm. The moment supper ended, the ledgers came back onto the table. So did the survey journal. So did the maps. Hours passed. Numbers filled the room. Dates. Names. Property references. Boundary revisions. Transfer records. The deeper they dug, the stranger everything became. At some point after midnight, Willamina suddenly froze. A single line inside an old ledger had caught her attention. She leaned closer. Read it again. Then again. Thaddius looked up immediately. She turned the book toward him. His eyes followed her finger. A payment entry. Nothing unusual at first glance, except for the name attached. Elias Granger. The amount was small, only $15, but the date mattered. The payment had been recorded nearly a year after the man's official death. The cabin became silent. Thaddius frowned. Willamina flipped pages, then found another entry. And another. 3 separate transactions. 3 separate dates. All after the supposed death. The amounts weren't large, which somehow made them more believable. Fraudsters often forged large sums. These looked routine. Ordinary. The kind nobody questioned. She leaned back slowly. The mountain man stared at the ledger. Neither explanation felt comforting. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the mountain slept beneath fresh snow. Inside, an old mystery grew larger. Much larger. The next morning brought bitter cold. The kind that turned breath into crystals. The kind that punished mistakes. Thaddius needed to inspect trap lines farther up the mountain. Normally he would go alone. This time he hesitated. Willamina pulled on her coat. A brief pause. Then a nod. That was becoming a pattern. They rode north through dense forest. The climb grew steeper with every mile. Snow covered everything. Trees. Boulders. Streams. Even entire sections of trail. Hours passed without seeing another human being. The isolation felt enormous. At midday they reached the first trap line. Thaddius checked each set carefully. Explaining little. Demonstrating much. Willamina watched closely. Mountain survival depended on observation. The lesson became clear quickly. Tracks mattered. Broken branches mattered. Changes mattered. Everything told a story. If you knew how to read it. By late afternoon she noticed something unusual. A section of snow near the edge of a ridge appeared disturbed. Not naturally. Deliberately. He looked immediately. She pointed. The mountain man dismounted. Kneeling beside the area, he brushed away snow. A moment later his expression changed. He uncovered a boot print. Then another. Then a third. Recent. Very recent. No more than a day old. Willamina frowned. The answer came instantly. Thaddius pointed toward the sole pattern. She looked closer. He was right. Different tread. Different shape. Not designed for mountain travel. Whoever came through here wasn't he experienced, which raised an obvious question. Why were they here? The mountain man followed the tracks. Willamina followed him. The trail wound through trees, across a frozen stream, then upward toward a rocky slope. Eventually the tracks ended beside an abandoned cabin. The structure looked ancient, half buried by snow. Roof partially collapsed. Windows broken. Nobody should have been living there. Yet smoke stains appeared surprisingly fresh. Someone had used it recently. Very recently. Thaddius approached cautiously. Rifle ready. The door creaked open. Inside waited silence. Dust. Cold. And evidence. A blanket. Fresh ashes. Food wrappers. Boot marks. Someone had stayed here. Not long ago. Willamina searched carefully. Years of cleaning boarding houses had taught her an important lesson. People always left traces. Always. The trick was knowing where to look. Near the back wall she discovered a small metal tin, hidden beneath loose boards. Thaddius crossed the room. She opened the container. Inside lay several folded papers. Receipts. Supply orders. A few handwritten notes. Nothing extraordinary, until she reached the final page. Then her pulse quickened. The note contained only a few lines. No greeting. No signature. No explanation. Just instructions. The body remains hidden. Maintain the transfer schedule. Kane will handle the recorder. Burn this after reading. The room seemed to tilt. Neither spoke. For several seconds they simply stared. Then Thaddius carefully took the paper. His jaw tightened. Everett Kane. Again. Always Everett Kane. The merchant appeared everywhere. Property transfers. Land disputes. Suspicious records. And now secret correspondence. The note didn't prove everything, but it proved enough. Someone had hidden a body, or claimed to. Someone had manipulated records, and Everett Kane can no cape about it. The discovery should have felt like progress. Instead it felt dangerous, because evidence changed people, especially guilty people. The ride home began immediately. Neither wanted to remain exposed after finding the note. Darkness approached. The temperature dropped rapidly. The mountain grew quiet. Too quiet. About halfway home, Thaddius suddenly raised a hand. Stop. Willamina obeyed instantly. The mountain man listened, then slowly turned. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the trees, the ridges, the shadows. Then she heard it too. A sound. Distant. Faint. A horse. Following them. Not close. Not yet. But there. Someone was on the trail behind them. The sound vanished. Then returned. Then vanished again. Careful. Intentional. Watching. Thaddius' expression hardened. The single word carried urgency. They urged their horses forward. The trail twisted through dense forest. Snow flew beneath pounding hooves. The sound behind them remained. Never closer. Never farther. Always there. Watching. Following. The cabin finally appeared just before dark. Relief washed through Willamina, until she noticed something wrong. The front door stood open. Wide open. Thaddius saw it too. Both stopped immediately. The mountain man swung down from his horse, rifle already in hand. The cabin should have been locked. Always locked. Yet now the door moved gently in the evening wind. Back and forth. Back and forth. Willamina's pulse hammered. Someone had entered. The only question was why. Thaddius stepped inside first. She followed moments later. The room looked untouched. At first. Then she saw it. The table. The ledgers. The survey journal. The maps. Gone. Every single one. Only one object remained. A folded sheet of paper resting in the centre of the empty table. Thaddius opened it. Read it. Then went completely still. Willamina's stomach tightened. The mountain man looked up slowly. His face had become colder than the winter outside. Then he handed her the note. She read the single sentence written across the page. Stop digging. The next grave one be empty, the cabin remained silent. Only the fire crackled. Only the wind whispered against the walls. Willamina stared at the note. Read it again. Then again. The words never changed. Stop digging. The next grave one to be empty. A threat. Not a warning. Not a bluff. A threat. Someone knew they were investigating. Someone knew exactly what they had found. And someone had entered the cabin while they were gone. The realization settled heavily over the room. Thaddius folded the paper. His face revealed almost nothing. But Willamina was beginning to know him, beginning to recognize small changes. The tightening jaw. The stillness. The dangerous calm. He was angry. Very angry. His voice remained level. Willamina forced herself to focus. Together they searched the cabin. Drawers. Storage chests. Shelves. Supply cabinets. The intruder had been selective. Food untouched. Money untouched. Weapons untouched. Only documents. Only evidence. Only things connected to Elias Granger and the land dispute. That alone told them plenty. The thief knew exactly what mattered. And exactly what frightened them. Hours later they sat at the table. Neither wanted sleep. Neither trusted the darkness outside. Finally Willamina spoke. Thaddius nodded. The mountain man stared into the fire. A troubling silence followed. There weren't many possibilities. Someone in town had seen them. Someone had reported their movements. Someone was helping Everett Kane. Perhaps several people. The conspiracy suddenly felt larger than either of them had imagined. Much larger. Then another thought struck Willamina. A worse one. Thaddius looked up. The room became still, because that possibility felt entirely plausible. The mountain sat alone. Isolated. Easy to observe from a distance. Difficult to defend. Thaddius slowly leaned back. His expression darkened. Neither spoke after that. Neither needed to. The implication hung between them. Heavy. Unpleasant. Real. The following morning began with preparation. Not investigation. Preparation. For the first time since arriving, Willamina saw the mountain man treating the situation as a direct threat. Extra firewood moved indoors. Rifles cleaned. Ammunition counted. Doors reinforced. Windows checked. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just practical survival. That was how mountain people stayed alive. They prepared before danger arrived. Not after. By midday they rode toward a distant trapping camp. Not because they wanted company. Because they needed information. Several independent trappers worked the northern slopes. Men who knew the wilderness better than anyone. Men who noticed unusual activity. If strangers were moving through the mountains, somebody might know. The journey took most of the day. Snow glittered beneath bright winter sunlight. Cold air stung exposed skin. The mountains seemed peaceful, almost beautiful, which made the danger feel even more deceptive. Near sunset they reached the camp. 3 cabins surrounded a central fire pit. Smoke drifted into the evening sky. Dogs barked as they approached. Several men emerged. Most recognized Thaddius immediately. Greetings remained brief. Mountain people wasted few words. Eventually conversation shifted toward recent events. The missing grave. The land dispute. Everett Kane. The mood changed instantly. Nobody smiled. Nobody laughed. One trapper named Caleb finally spat into the snow. Another nodded. Willamina froze. Caleb glanced toward her. The statement landed heavily. "You knew Elias Granger?" she asked. The trapper shrugged. Caleb hesitated, then looked toward Thaddius, apparently deciding how much to reveal. Finally he spoke. "Of course. Always land." But Caleb was tea-finished. The campfire crackled. Everyone listened. "What kind of something?" Willamina asked. The trapper shook his head. Caleb stared into the flames. A strange feeling crawled up Willamina's spine. Proof. Evidence. The same thing she and Thaddius now sought. The trapper's expression hardened. The fire popped. Snow drifted through the darkness. And every person at the camp listened. Silence followed. Complete silence. Willamina felt her pulse quicken. Stealing the mountain. The phrase sounded impossible. Ridiculous, even. Yet somehow it fit everything. Property transfers. Boundary changes. Forged records. Missing bodies. Land claims. Somebody had indeed been stealing pieces of the mountain. One document at a time. One lie at a time. One boundary marker at a time. Then Caleb delivered another revelation. The week before he disappeared, Elias came through here carrying a metal lockbox. Willamina immediately sat forward. The trapper nodded. The campfire suddenly felt hotter. A hidden lockbox. A missing body. A dead man's signature. The puzzle pieces began shifting. Slowly. Dangerously. Thaddius spoke for the first time in several minutes. Caleb nodded once, then pointed toward the eastern mountains, toward a jagged ridge visible beneath moonlight. Willamina exchanged a glance with Thaddius. The name meant nothing to her. The mountain man, however, looked troubled. Very troubled. "What?" she asked. He stared toward the distant ridge. Caleb snorted. That answer did not improve matters. The ride home the next day felt different. The lockbox changed everything. If Elias Granger truly possessed evidence, if he hid it before disappearing, if someone had spent years trying to erase records, then perhaps the proof still existed. Somewhere. Waiting. The possibility fueled hope. Dangerous hope. Late that afternoon they reached the cabin. For the first time in days, neither spoke about ledgers or graves. They simply worked. Chores. Repairs. Wood cutting. Ordinary tasks. Necessary tasks. And somehow the simplicity helped. As dusk approached, Willamina carried water from the creek. The trip should have taken minutes. Instead it changed everything. She nearly missed it. A small object protruding from the snow near the edge of the path. Metal. Old. Partially buried. Curiosity made her stop. She knelt, brushed away snow, and uncovered a brass key. A very unusual brass key. Large. Heavy. Intricately shaped. Not a house key. Not a padlock key. Something older. Something important. Her pulse quickened immediately, because attached to the key hung a small tarnished tag, and stamped into the tag were 2 words. For several seconds she simply stared. The cold vanished. The mountain vanished. Everything vanished except the key in her hand. Then she heard a sound. A twig snapping behind her. Willamina turned instantly. Someone stood among the trees, watching. Not 50 yards away. A man, tall, motionless. The moment their eyes met, he disappeared into the forest. Running, fast. As if the last thing in the world he wanted was for her to find that key, Willamina's first instinct was to chase him. Her second instinct saved her life. The stranger vanished between snow-covered pines almost immediately. Too fast. Too familiar with the terrain. Too prepared. By the time she took 2 steps forward, common sense caught up with adrenaline. A lone woman running into unfamiliar forest at dusk after discovering a crucial piece of evidence was exactly the kind of mistake that ended stories badly. She stopped, forced herself to breathe, then looked down at the key again. The brass felt cold against her palm. Heavy. Real. Attached to it was the tarnished metal tag. Granger lockbox. Not a coincidence. Not a rumour. Not another half-forgotten story. Evidence. Physical evidence. Someone had either hidden it here or lost it here. And judging by the man who had been watching her, someone desperately wanted it recovered before she found it. Willamina closed her hand around the key and hurried back toward the cabin. She reached the yard nearly running. Thaddius looked up immediately from the woodpile. One glance at her face was enough. She held up the key. The mountain man froze. For perhaps the first time since she had met him, genuine surprise crossed his features. His expression hardened. The answer clearly displeased him. Not because she had done something wrong, because danger had gotten close. Very close. She told him about the man in the trees. Every detail she could remember. Height. Build. Clothing. Direction of travel. When she finished, Thaddius took the key, examined it carefully, then turned it over. Something caught his attention. A small marking, almost invisible, carved near the base. The initials E.G. Elias Granger. No question now. The key was genuine. The problem was obvious. A key meant nothing without a lock, and the lockbox itself remained missing. That night they spread maps across the table again. The cabin glowed with firelight. Outside, darkness swallowed the mountain. Inside, possibilities multiplied. If Granger hid evidence, Willamina said, he needed a place nobody would accidentally find. Thaddius nodded. The mountain man leaned forward. His voice remained calm. Certain. She considered that. The logic held. A man protecting dangerous evidence wouldn't trust civilization. He would trust isolation. Distance. Mountain terrain. Exactly the kind of wilderness surrounding Old Bear's Pass. The realization settled heavily over both of them. The lockbox might still be there, waiting, after all these years. If so, it could contain answers, and answers appeared increasingly valuable. The next morning they left before dawn. The decision hadn't been easy. Winter travel through Gerhardt mountain passes carried real risks. Avalanches, hidden crevasses, storms, yet every instinct told them the opportunity wouldn't last. Someone else was searching. Someone else had already been watching. Every day increased the chance evidence would disappear forever. The journey north took nearly 6 hours. As elevation increased, the world changed. Trees grew thinner. Wind grew stronger. Snow deepened. Several sections of trail had almost vanished entirely. At one point they dismounted and led their horses across a narrow ridge barely wider than a wagon wheel. Thousands of feet of empty space waited below. Willamina refused to look down. Thaddius noticed. Said nothing. By afternoon they reached the edge of Old Bear S Pass. The place looked abandoned by humanity. Jagged cliffs surrounded a narrow valley. Ancient pines twisted against constant wind. Snow covered everything. Silence dominated the landscape. A strange silence. The kind that felt older than people. Willamina understood immediately why rumors surrounded the place. It looked like somewhere secrets could survive. For years. Maybe decades. They searched until sunset. Nothing. No lockbox. No hidden cave. No buried evidence. Only rock. Snow. And disappointment. Finally Thaddius pointed toward a sheltered area beneath a cliff. Willamina nodded. Travelling after dark would be suicide. Within an hour they had established a small camp. Fire. Shelter. Simple food. The basics. Night arrived quickly. Stars filled the sky. Cold settled over the mountains like a living thing. For a while neither spoke. Then Willamina broke the silence. The question escaped before she could stop it. Immediately she regretted it. The fire crackled softly. Thaddius stared into the flames. A long silence followed. Then another. Eventually he answered. The words sounded fragile, rarely used. Willamina waited. The mountain man continued staring at the fire. A terrible sadness entered his voice. The flames reflected in his eyes. The words landed heavily. Willamina's chest tightened. No parent should have to tell that story. No parent should have to live it. The answer emerged almost as a whisper. Silence followed. Deep. Painful. Honest. The mountain wind moved through distant trees. The fire popped softly. And for the first time, Willamina truly understood the loneliness she had found in the cabin. It was solitude. It was grief. Years of grief. Years of surviving after everyone else was gone. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between them. Not dramatically. Not romantically. Simply human. Her hand rested briefly over his. The mountain man looked down. Then at her. Neither spoke. Nothing needed saying. A strange warmth passed between them. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter. Trust. Real trust. The kind built through hardship. The kind impossible to fake. Then a rifle shot shattered the night. The sound exploded across the mountains. Instantly both were moving. Thaddius grabbed his weapon. Willamina dropped behind a boulder. Another shot echoed. Closer. Much closer. A bullet slammed into a tree near the campfire. Wood splintered. Someone shouted from the darkness. A third shot followed. Then silence. Complete silence. The attack had lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet the message was unmistakable. They had found the right place. Because nobody tried this hard to stop people chasing the wrong secret. For nearly an hour they waited. Listening. Watching. Eventually the mountains grew quiet again. The attacker never returned. Near midnight, while checking the area around camp, Willamina discovered something unexpected. Tracks. Fresh tracks. Several sets. Not one attacker. 3. Maybe 4. And among those tracks lay a single dropped object. A folded piece of paper partially buried beneath snow. She retrieved it carefully. Opened it beside the fire. Then froze. Her pulse hammered. Because she immediately recognized the handwriting. Not Everett Kane S. Not Elias Granger S. Not anyone from town. The handwriting belonged to Amos Hartwell. Her stepfather. The note contained only one sentence. "Meet me at the survey marker before Kane arrives." Willamina stared at the words. Then at the signature. Then at the date. The paper was T years old. It wasn't T months old. It was only 4 days old, which meant her stepfather wasn't merely connected to the conspiracy. He was still actively participating in it. And somewhere in these mountains, right now, Amos Hartwell and Everett Kane were working together. Willamina's first instinct was to chase him. Her second instinct saved her life. The stranger vanished between snow-covered pines almost immediately. Too fast. Too familiar with the terrain. Too prepared. By the time she took 2 steps forward, common sense caught up with adrenaline. A lone woman running into unfamiliar forest at morph dusk after discovering a crucial piece of evidence was exactly the kind of mistake that ended stories badly. She stopped, forced herself to breathe, then looked down at the key again. The brass felt cold against her palm. Heavy. Real. Attached to it was the tarnished metal tag. Granger lockbox. Not a coincidence. Not a rumour. Not another half-forgotten story. Evidence. Physical evidence. Someone had either hidden it here or lost it here. And judging by the man who had been watching her, someone desperately wanted it recovered before she found it. Willamina closed her hand around the key and hurried back toward the cabin. She reached the yard nearly running. Thaddius looked up immediately from the woodpile. One glance at her face was enough. She held up the key. The mountain man froze. For perhaps the first time since she had met him, genuine surprise crossed his features. His expression hardened. The answer clearly displeased him. Not because she had done something wrong, because danger had gotten close. Very close. She told him about the man in the trees. Every detail she could remember. Height. Build. Clothing. Direction of travel. When she finished, Thaddius took the key, examined it carefully, then turned it over. Something caught his attention. A small marking, almost invisible, carved near the base. The initials E.G. Elias Granger. No question now. The key was genuine. The problem was obvious. A key meant nothing without a lock, and the lockbox itself remained missing. That night they spread maps across the table again. The cabin glowed with firelight. Outside, darkness swallowed the mountain. Inside, possibilities multiplied. If Granger hid evidence, Willamina said, he needed a place nobody would accidentally find. Thaddius nodded. The mountain man leaned forward. His voice remained calm, certain. She considered that. The logic held. A man protecting dangerous evidence wouldn't trust civilization. He would trust isolation, distance, mountain terrain, exactly the kind of wilderness surrounding Old Bear's Pass. The realization settled heavily over both of them. The lockbox might still be there, waiting, after all these years. If so, it could contain answers, and answers appeared increasingly valuable. The next morning they left before dawn. The decision hadn't been easy. Winter travel through Igerhart mountain passes carried real risks. Avalanches, hidden crevasses, storms. Yet every instinct told them the opportunity wouldn't last. Someone else was searching. Someone else had already been watching. Every day increased the chance evidence would disappear forever. The journey north took nearly 6 hours. As elevation increased, the world changed. Trees grew thinner. Wind grew stronger. Snow deepened. Several sections of trail had almost vanished entirely. At one point they dismounted and led their horses across a narrow ridge barely wider than a wagon wheel. Thousands of feet of empty space waited below. Willamina refused to look down. Thaddius noticed. Said nothing. By afternoon they reached the edge of Old Bear's Pass. The place looked abandoned by humanity. Jagged cliffs surrounded a narrow valley. Ancient pines twisted against constant wind. Snow covered everything. Silence dominated the landscape. A strange silence. The kind that felt older than people. Willamina understood immediately why rumors surrounded the place. It looked like somewhere secrets could survive. For years. Maybe decades. They searched until sunset. Nothing. No lockbox. No hidden cave. No buried evidence. Only rock. Snow. And disappointment. Finally Thaddius pointed toward a sheltered area beneath a cliff. Willamina nodded. Travelling after dark would be suicide. Within an hour they had established a small camp. Fire. Shelter. Simple food. The basics. Night arrived quickly. Stars filled the sky. Cold settled over the mountains like a living thing. For a while neither spoke. Then Willamina broke the silence. The question escaped before she could stop it. Immediately she regretted it. The fire crackled softly. Thaddius stared into the flames. A long silence followed. Then another. Eventually he answered. The words sounded fragile, rarely used. Willamina waited. The mountain man continued staring at the fire. A terrible sadness entered his voice. The flames reflected in his eyes. The words landed heavily. Willamina's chest tightened. No parent should have to tell that story. No parent should have to live it. The answer emerged almost as a whisper. Silence followed. Deep. Painful. Honest. The mountain wind moved through distant trees. The fire popped softly. And for the first time, Willamina truly understood the loneliness she had found in the cabin. It was solitude. It was grief. Years of grief. Years of surviving after everyone else was gone. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between them. Not dramatically. Not romantically. Simply human. Her hand rested briefly over his. The mountain man looked down. Then at her. Neither spoke. Nothing needed saying. A strange warmth passed between them. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter. Trust. Real trust. The kind built through hardship. The kind impossible to fake. Then a rifle shot shattered the night. The sound exploded across the mountains. Instantly both were moving. Thaddius grabbed his weapon. Willamina dropped behind a boulder. Another shot echoed. Closer. Much closer. A bullet slammed into a tree near the campfire. Wood splintered. Someone shouted from the darkness. A third shot followed. Then silence. Complete silence. The attack had lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet the message was unmistakable. They had found the right place. Because nobody tried this hard to stop people chasing the wrong secret. For nearly an hour they waited. Listening. Watching. Eventually the mountains grew quiet again. The attacker never returned. Near midnight, while checking the area around camp, Willamina discovered something unexpected. Tracks. Fresh tracks. Several sets. Not one attacker. 3. Maybe 4. And among those tracks lay a single dropped object. A folded piece of paper partially buried beneath snow. She retrieved it carefully, opened it beside the fire, then froze. Her pulse hammered, because she immediately recognized the handwriting. Not Everett Kane S. Not Elias Granger S. Not anyone from town. The handwriting belonged to Amos Hartwell, her stepfather. The note contained only one sentence. Meet me at the survey marker before Kane arrives. Willamina stared at the words. Then at the signature. Then at the date. The paper wasn't 2 years old. It wasn't 2 months old. It was only 4 days old, which meant her stepfather wasn't merely connected to the conspiracy. He was still actively participating in it. And somewhere in these mountains, right now, Amos Hartwell and Everett Kane were working together. The canyon erupted into confusion. One moment Amos Hartwell stood smiling. The next, every certainty shattered. The first rifle shot had come from the ridge above. The second from farther east. The third from somewhere behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the canyon floor. Perfect positioning. Perfect timing. The mountain trappers had planned this. Amos spun wildly. His confidence vanished instantly. The 3 gunmen scrambled for cover. One dropped his rifle entirely. Another threw himself behind a boulder. The third disappeared among the rocks. Ben Holloway stood atop the ridge like a judge delivering a sentence. Snow whipped around him. 6 armed trappers flanked his position. None looked interested in negotiation. Drop your weapons, Ben shouted again. The canyon echoed Vekepihata's voice. Nobody moved. Nobody trusted anyone. Then Thaddius calmly raised his rifle. Not at the trappers. At Amos. The distinction mattered. A lot. Amos saw it too. For the first time all day, genuine fear crossed his face. Don't be stupid. Corbett. The mountain man didn't answer. He simply held position. Steady. Patient. Dangerous. The trappers maintained pressure from above. The gunmen remained trapped below. Nobody possessed a clean escape route. Willamina's attention focused elsewhere. The leather satchel. The one carried by Amos' associate. The one that might contain the missing survey report. The evidence. The truth. Everything. The man still clutched it tightly while hiding behind a rock. And he looked terrified. Good. Terrified people made mistakes. The standoff stretched. Seconds became minutes. The wind howled through the canyon. Snow drifted across footprints. Then Amos made the mistake Willamina had been waiting for. He tried to run. The moment he bolted toward the western slope, every eye followed him, including his own men, including Thaddius, including Ben. For one critical second, nobody watched the satchel. Nobody except Willamina. She moved instantly. Years of hard labor had built strength. Years of humiliation had built determination. And years of surviving Amos Hartwell had taught her exactly when selfish men abandoned everyone around them. She sprinted. The satchel carrier saw her too late. He lunged. She collided with him. Both crashed into the snow. The leather bag flew loose. The man cursed, scrambled, reached. Willamina drove her shoulder into his chest. Hard. The breath exploded from his lungs. The satchel slid across the snow, toward open ground, toward Thaddius. The mountain man moved immediately. One stride. Then another. Then his hand closed around the bag. Everything stopped. The gunman froze. Amos froze. Even the trappers seemed to recognize the importance of what had just happened. The evidence had changed hands, and everybody knew it. The gunman suddenly threw down his rifle. Another followed. Then another. The fight disappeared almost instantly, because men risked their lives for money, not for somebody else's money, especially not when surrounded. Within minutes the canyon belonged to the trappers. Amos Hartwell sat in the snow with his hands bound, furious, humiliated, defeated, yet somehow still arrogant. The trait seemed impossible to kill. Ben approached. His weathered face remained grim. Thaddius nodded. Willamina accepted a blanket offered by one of the trappers. Only then did she realize how hard her heart was pounding. Ben pointed toward the satchel. Nobody argued. The moment felt too important. Thaddius placed the leather bag on a flat rock. The buckle opened. The flap lifted. Inside rested a stack of documents. Dozens of them. Some old, some recent, some yellowed by age. Others almost new. Willamina immediately recognized property records, survey reports, transfer forms, boundary revisions. Everything. The entire scheme. Years of it. Her pulse quickened. They spread the papers across the rock. The evidence painted a devastating picture. False transfers, altered survey maps, forged amendments, payments hidden through multiple accounts. And beneath everything, one name appeared repeatedly. Everett Kane. Not occasionally. Constantly. The Merchant S fingerprints covered the entire operation. Every lie. Every theft. Every fraudulent claim. Then Willamina found the document. The original survey report. The report Amos had accidentally revealed. The report Elias Granger had discovered years earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. A detailed geological assessment filled the pages. Silver deposits. Ore estimates. Location markers. Potential values. The figures seemed almost unbelievable. The mountain wasn't merely valuable. It was worth a fortune. A life-changing fortune. A town-changing fortune. Suddenly everything made sense. Every death. Every disappearance. Every forged signature. Every stolen acre. Every threat. The silver explained all of it. Then she turned another page and found something worse. A letter written by Elias Granger, addressed to the county land office. Never delivered. The paper crackled softly in the wind. Willamina began reading aloud. The canyon fell silent. Elias described discovering survey fraud. He described confronting Everett Kane. He described gathering evidence. Then came the final paragraph. The one that mattered most. The one that changed the entire story. If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. Everett Kane knows Mort possess proof. He has already threatened me once. Should Mort disappear, this letter serves as testimony. The words struck like thunder. Even Amos looked pale. Because this wasn't suspicion. It wasn't T-rumour. It was a T-theory. It was testimony. Direct testimony. From the victim himself. Ben slowly removed his hat. The trappers exchanged grim looks, and Thaddius remained very still. The letter continued. One final line waited near the bottom. Willamina read it twice before understanding. Then her stomach dropped. The whisper escaped before she could stop it. Everyone looked toward her. What? Thaddius asked. She turned the page around, pointed toward a name. A witness name. A second person who had seen the evidence years ago. A second person who could verify everything. A second person everybody believed was dead. Silence settled over the canyon, because the name written beside Elias Granger's signature was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Yet there it was. Written clearly. Written undeniably. Written in Elias' own hand. Witness, Samuel Corbett. The mountain man stared at the page. Colour drained from his face. For several seconds nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because Samuel Corbett was the name of Thaddius' son. The son who had supposedly died 8 years ago. The son Thaddius had buried himself. Nobody moved. The mountain wind seemed to vanish. The canyon itself felt suspended between heartbeats. Samuel Corbett. The name sat on the page like a bullet. Impossible. Completely impossible. Thaddius stared at the document. His hands did not shake. His face showed almost nothing. But Willamina knew him now. Knew enough. The silence wasn't calm. It was devastation. Ben Holloway finally spoke. The mountain man didn't he answer. His eyes remained fixed on the letter. On the name. On the impossible truth. 8 years earlier he had buried a small coffin. He had stood in frozen ground beside a church. He had lowered his son into the earth. He had mourned. He had survived. Barely. And now a dead man was listed as a witness to a conspiracy. No father could read that and remain unchanged. Willamina stepped beside him. Not speaking. Simply standing there. Present. After a long moment, Thaddius finally looked up. His voice emerged low and controlled. Willamina checked the date. Then checked again. The answer made her stomach tighten. The canyon became silent again. Even Amos Hartwell looked uncomfortable. Because now the mystery had become something far larger than silver. Far larger than land. Someone had hidden a child. Or lied about a death. Or both. The implications felt endless. Ben exhaled slowly. The voice came from Amos. Everyone turned. The bound man sat in the snow. Pale. Sweating despite the cold. And suddenly afraid. Genuinely afraid. Interesting. Very interesting. Ben narrowed his eyes. Amos swallowed. For the first time in his life. He appeared to understand the danger of speaking. Unfortunately for him, fear loosened tongues. Nobody seemed surprised. Not really. The corruption had become almost expected, but hearing it confirmed mattered. Amos looked around desperately. The confession hung in the air. Thaddius stepped forward. Amos hesitated. Then survival overcame loyalty. One name after another spilled out. Officials. Record keepers. Deputies. Merchants. Men who had spent years helping Everett Kane reshape property records. Years protecting the silver discovery. Years stealing the mountain. Willamina listened carefully. Every name mattered. Every detail mattered. Because now they possessed something stronger than suspicion. They possessed testimony. And testimony could destroy powerful people, if handled correctly. By dusk the entire group had returned to town. Word travelled faster than horses. The settlement buzzed with rumours. Crowds formed before they even reached the main street. People emerged from stores, from homes, from saloons. Everybody wanted answers. Everybody sensed something significant had happened. And for once, the truth was finally arriving. Everett Kane stood waiting outside his trading office. Well-dressed. Calm. Confident. The same confident smile greeted them. At least initially. Then he noticed Amos. Bound. Defeated. And carrying none of the documents. The smile disappeared. Instantly, the merchant's eyes narrowed. Calculations flashed behind them. Options. Escape routes. Lies. Excuses. The usual tools. He opened his mouth. Never got the chance. Ben Holloway raised the satchel. The entire crowd saw it. Murmurs spread immediately. Everett's face changed. Just slightly. Enough. Thaddius stepped forward. The mountain man rarely addressed crowds. Rarely spoke more than necessary. Tonight was different. His voice carried across the street. The crowd quieted. Silence deepened. Everett attempted a laugh. It sounded weak. Willamina stepped forward. For the first time in her life, nobody laughed when she did. Nobody mocked her. Nobody dismissed her. Because she carried evidence, and evidence commanded respect. She held up the original survey report. A ripple passed through the crowd. People exchanged confused looks, concerned looks, then shocked looks. The realization spread quickly. The land dispute, the disappearances, the rumours, everything connected. Everett's confidence cracked. Only slightly, but visibly, and people noticed. That was important. Very important. The merchant attempted another smile. Willamina unfolded Elias Granger's letter. The crowd grew quiet enough to hear breathing. Then she began reading. Every word, every accusation, every warning, every line written by a man who knew he was in danger. When she finished, nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Then an elderly rancher stepped forward. Another nodded. A third voice joined. The crowd shifted. Momentum. The invisible force that changed outcomes. For years Everett Kane had controlled the narrative. Now he was losing it. Fast. The merchant realized it too. His expression hardened. Desperation had entered his voice. A dangerous sign. Willamina felt something click into place. The final piece. The final trap. She looked directly at him. The merchant froze. The single word landed harder than any accusation. Willamina slowly held up the letter again, then pointed toward the witness signature. Samuel Corbett. The crowd followed her gesture. Confusion spread. Everett's face went pale. For the first time all day, genuine fear appeared, not because of the signature itself, because of what it implied. The merchant knew something nobody else did, and he suddenly realized everyone could see it. The reaction exposed him completely. "You know who Samuel was," Willamina said. The crowd watched. Everett remained silent. Still silence. The merchant's jaw tightened. And that was enough. The crowd saw it. Ben saw it. Thaddius saw it. Everyone saw it. The truth was standing in plain sight. Everett Kane knew far too much hat about a dead child. The merchant backed away. One step. Then another. Panic. Real panic. He turned. Tried to run. The crowd blocked him. Not with weapons. Not with threats. With anger. Years of anger. Years of manipulation. Years of lies. The sheriff finally appeared. Too late. Much too late. And unfortunately for him, Amos Hartwell immediately pointed. The town exploded. Questions. Shouting. Demands. Accusations. The sheriff's face turned white. The conspiracy was collapsing. Publicly. Completely. And there was nothing left to stop it. Nothing except one final mystery. Because even as Everett Kane was arrested, even as forged records were seized, even as the stolen mountain returned to its rightful owners, one impossible question remained. Where was Samuel Corbett? Because somebody had hidden the truth for 8 years. And late that night, after the town meeting ended and the evidence was secured, a trembling Everett Kane finally whispered the words that changed everything. The room went silent. The merchant closed his eyes, then spoke the sentence Thaddius had waited 8 years to hear. "Your son is alive," the words echoed through the room. "Your son is alive." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the lantern flames seemed frozen. Thaddius stood perfectly still. The man who had survived blizzards, wolves, loneliness, grief, and betrayal suddenly looked as though the ground beneath him had vanished. Willamina felt her own heart pounding. Alive. After 8 years. After a funeral. After a grave. After all the pain. Alive. Everett Kane sat under guard at the town hall table. The confidence that had protected him for years was gone. Only exhaustion remained. And fear. A great deal of fear. Thaddius finally found his voice. The single word sounded almost fragile. Everett swallowed. Silence followed. Then Ben Holloway slammed a hand against the table. The merchant flinched. Kane wasn't alone, Amos Hartwell muttered miserably from the corner. Nobody paid him attention. Not yet. Everett lowered his head. When Elias Granger found the survey report, he realized what we'd done. The confession began slowly, then accelerated, years of secrets finally spilling loose. The room listened. "The lockbox," Willamina said. Everett nodded. His voice sounded defeated. The merchant looked directly at Thaddius. The mountain man never blinked. never moved. Yet Willamina sensed the effort required to remain standing. Everett continued. A terrible feeling settled across the room. The merchant closed his eyes. The room grew colder. Thaddius took a step forward. Ben immediately placed a hand on his shoulder, not to restrain him, to steady him. The merchant hurried onward. "What fever?" Thaddius asked. The room fell silent, because everyone remembered. 8 years earlier, sickness had swept through several settlements. Children died. Adults died. Entire families disappeared. Chaos followed. Everett's voice became quieter. When Samuel became ill, somebody saw an opportunity. Willamina felt sick. A terrible opportunity. The kind monsters recognized. The kind ordinary people never imagined. The confession struck like lightning. No one spoke. No one could. Everett looked at the floor. Silence. Absolute silence. Thaddius closed his eyes. Just once. The smallest movement. The largest wound. Everett continued. The merchant's voice cracked. "Where?" Thaddius asked. Again. One word. Nothing else. Everett looked toward the window, toward distant mountains. The room seemed to stop breathing. Years. 8 years. An entire childhood stolen. An entire life rewritten. And somewhere beyond those mountains, Samuel Corbett still lived. The following days passed in a blur. Federal investigators arrived. County officials arrived. Land agents arrived. The evidence proved overwhelming. The survey reports. The forged transfers. The hidden payments. The testimony. The lockbox itself, finally recovered from a concealed cave near Old Bear's Pass, contained enough records to destroy every remaining lie. Everett Kane faced charges. The corrupt sheriff faced charges. Several officials resigned. Others were arrested. The stolen claims were overturned. The mountain returned to its rightful legal ownership. Justice moved slowly. But it moved. For the first time in years, the town watched truth win. Not through gunfire. Not through revenge. Through evidence. Through records. Through courage. And through a woman nobody had wanted. Weeks later, spring finally began touching the mountains. Snow melted from lower slopes. Creeks ran faster. Green appeared along sheltered hillsides. Life returned. One afternoon a rider approached the cabin. Not a stranger. A federal marshal. Willamina saw him first. Thaddius met him in the yard. The marshal dismounted, removed his hat, and handed over a letter. The mountersman opened it carefully. Read. Then read again. When he looked up, his eyes were shining. Willamina had never seen that before. Never. Not once. He handed her the paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. A location. A name. A confirmation. Samuel Corbett had been found. Alive. Living nearly 200 miles away. Working on a ranch. 24 years old. Healthy. Unmarried. Unaware of his true identity until recently. The letter blurred briefly. Willamina blinked away tears. Not sadness. Relief. The kind that arrived after carrying too much weight for too long. The journey took nearly 3 weeks. Every mile mattered. Every sunrise felt longer. Every campfire burned slower. until finally they arrived. A ranch surrounded by rolling grassland. A windmill. A barn. A farmhouse. Ordinary. Beautifully ordinary. And standing beside a fence. A man. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark-haired. Watching them approach. For a long moment nobody moved. The young man looked uncertain. Nervous. Hopeful. Then Thaddius stepped down from the wagon. The years seemed to collapse between them. No dramatic speeches followed. No grand declaration. Just a father looking at his son, and a son looking at his father. The silence said everything. Eventually Samuel crossed the distance first. The embrace that followed broke something loose inside everyone watching. 8 years of grief. 8 years of loss. 8 years of unanswered questions. Gone. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. But healed. At last. Months later, summer settled across the mountains. The cabin looked different. Stronger. Warmer. Larger. A new barn stood beside the old one. Fresh fencing stretched across open ground. A vegetable garden flourished behind the house. Books filled the expanded shelves. Many of them belonged to Willamina now. One evening she stood on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. The same mountains people once tried to steal. The same mountains that had nearly destroyed them. The same mountains that had brought them together. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Thaddius stepped outside. Not the lonely man who had once waited for a stranger. Not the grieving father trapped in old sorrow. A different man. A healed man. He stood beside her. Quietly. Comfortably. The silence between them felt familiar now. Like home. After a moment he reached into his pocket. Willamina looked down. Small wooden box rested in his hand. She smiled immediately. A rare grin appeared. The box opened. Inside rested a simple ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing unnecessary. Perfect. Just like him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Thaddius cleared his throat. Willamina laughed softly. His eyes held hers. Steady. Warm. Certain. The mountain breeze moved through the pines. The last sunlight touched the cabin windows. And the man who had once chosen her when nobody else would finally spoke the truth. The ring slid onto her finger. The mountains stood witness. The same mountains that had hidden secrets. Protected evidence. Buried lies. And ultimately revealed truth. Years later, travellers passing through the region sometimes heard stories. Stories about a stubborn mountain man. Stories about a woman everyone underestimated. Stories about silver, forged deeds, missing graves, and justice. Most of the stories changed with time. Legends always did. But one detail never changed. Whenever people asked how everything began, old-timers simply smiled and pointed toward the mountains. Then they told the same answer. It started the day a lonely mountain man expected beauty to step off a wagon, and instead found courage. The cabin lights glowed warmly against the evening darkness. Laughter drifted from inside. Family gathered around supper. Books lined the shelves. Children played in the yard. And beyond it all, the mountain stood peaceful at last. Home. Finally home.